And Darja will be sharing the findings of those workshops with us. Thanks, Darja.
Yes, it's been wonderful, really huge topics. How do we make cities happier places for all? How do we encourage engagement and make us city dwellers go from kind of ideal to action, which is we need more of? And how can we increase a feeling of safety and security? So these were three really big topics. The discussions, I had to kind of tear them away and say, your time is out. You can't keep talking now, we have to move on. So I'm taking the chance of inviting Alexander back on stage, please. He was in the group discussing happier cities, and I would also love for you, Robert, to come here. And you were discussing the safer cities. So let me just start by asking Alexander, what did the discussions evolve around?
Oh, we
what
solved
happened?
everything. We know exactly how people are going to live and be happy from now on forever. So, the interesting thing with our group was that we had two real-life stories to start from. It was Joel, who was with me before, who was in the same panel as Darja and me before today, who actually decided last year to live for 6 months in a small cottage in the south of Sweden, deconnected. He decided to buy a house without electricity. And we also had a great girl from Iceland called Christine, and she decided something similar. She put her butt on a bicycle and bicycled around Europe for 6 months, being deconnected. And since very few people that are deconnecting themselves, turning off your smartphone, your laptop, and deconnect yourself, that's a really interesting story. So we decided to start there. What was their experience, deconnecting themselves both from city life and from the internet at the same time? And they came back with three things. One was connectivity. They really appreciate connectivity. This is not about hating the internet or getting offline forever. This was just an experiment to appreciate it and then look at it more creatively. Like, how can I use the internet to my own advantage when I get back and connect myself again and not let it control me? So connectivity was important. The second thing they mentioned was freedom, which is what they were lacking and what they were looking for, really looking for when they went offline and deconnected, was freedom, and to restore a sense of freedom, which they feel we don't have today. And we all agreed in our group. Freedom is a problem. So if you're going to be happy, we have to also feel free. And the third aspect was very interesting, I think. They both mentioned metaphysics. And they both mentioned immediately that they lacked a sense of belonging, a bigger picture. Christine used the words, I really felt that I wanted to be part of something bigger than myself, which is not being provided in today's cities. It's not being provided in today's online world. So this is something she was looking for and trying to find this through her experience. And we then looked into that, how that would apply on how you make a city a happier place to live in. And we came up with several different things. We were looking into some of the really interesting developments technologically at the moment. One interesting phenomenon is the phenomenon of couchsurfing, which we think radically will alter how we build cities. Because couchsurfing is just the beginning of a big movement where people are connecting each other through the internet around the world and then changing apartments with each other. So you can go from Helsinki to New York for 1 month, and somebody in New York goes to your place in Helsinki for a month, just to force yourself to change, to live in a different place, making new friends, and things like that. And people do this automatically online today. There are millions of people already couch surf. So this is a mass movement that's organic, started from underneath. A grassroots movement that's already occurring that will force people to change the idea of how you build the city. We also looked into 3D printing, which will make the production of physical products something that will happen in your own neighborhood. It's not something that happens at a factory in southern China somewhere and then you go to an H&M store and you buy it, but rather something, physical products or something we can bring back to our own neighborhoods that we can get more involved with, and we can then make them more personal, where something like Suguru comes in. And we even came to the conclusion we should build the World Suguru Tower. Why not build the whole building out of Suguru, rather than just mend things with it, but try to build the whole building. In other words, we decided to be straightforward, told you guys, the happy city groups today decided that we're going to fuck city planning. So city planners, throw them out. We hate city planning, that we agreed on. And yeah, and we also had another idea. Some people, of course the Scandinavians in the group, think that it's kind of nice to have a slow place and that cities are too, you know, there's too much speed in cities and things like that. I totally disagree. I like cities, the bigger and more intense the city is, the more I enjoy it. But, you know, we can have different opinions. We're all forced to live in these cities. So we came up with the idea that we should build towers of silence. Places you go to, like a temple, where you can connect metaphysically with other people in your community. And of course, since these are 21st century towers of silence, they would have blocks around the buildings that completely disconnect you from the internet. So your smartphone and your laptop stops working as soon as you walk inside that building, which will force you to go offline. So that's another creative idea we had.
Wonderful. And you're mentioning the couch surfing, and I heard you mention it before, and I think that's quite interesting because these kind of phenomenons are happening quite often right now, that we're opening up our homes to others. And that also relates to some really interesting things that happen in your group, Robert, where you were talking about how we could increase the feeling of safety. So
yeah, it was something really odd is happening in Helsinki, not in Stockholm. No, but it's the thing that we have this thing in Helsinki taking place a couple of times a year, I think, which is called the Restaurant Day. It's when basically just people like you and me, just basic people, just open their homes to people by creating a restaurant for one day. They just buy groceries and they prepare the food and they list their place on the website. And all the places are kind of, well, all people who are like participating in the Restaurant Day, they know where all these places are. So they kind of like, people are opening their homes through food to meet people. And it's totally like random people might show up and eat what you've done. And like last year I ended up eating Kobe and ribs for the first, or like Kobe the first time, Kobe meat. And well, it's a really fun kind of like experience because it's just like meeting people over food. It's like
and I think you were
thing.
talking quite a bit about how this type of phenomenon both makes us push ourselves a bit in terms of trust. In order to open up your home, you have to choose to trust people that you don't know.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting to see these phenomenons where we are actively encouraging ourselves to trust others. And I think there were more interesting examples in your group where you also mentioned other situations where, you know, if it's not just quiet, if we can find something to gather around, this will help inspire a feeling of safety and also make it easier to act when we see something because we kind of get used to interacting to each other in a different way. And I don't remember, because here's when it all becomes a blur.
Yeah.
The third group that we were talking about engagement ended up in similar examples. So pop-up restaurants or Skjutsgruppen, which happened spontaneously when we had this ash cloud from Iceland, that people started helping each other out, bringing complete strangers into their cars to get someplace. And on one side, you can take that as an example of disasters and huge challenges kind of forcing us together, giving a sense of belonging, making us happier, making us exercise trust. But it's also, is this something that we could find frameworks for? So what happened in the engagement group was talking about that what do we need to become more engaged? Well, we need visibility for each other to find which internet solved. It's so easy to show, here's an important issue, let's gather around this. But we also need the possibility to act on it. So the discussion started revolving around being able to claim a space or use a space for this, or being allowed to arrange this type of event, etc. And that's where the discussion started to formulate the problem also. Is this good? I mean, if we start engaging and doing all kinds of things, it's going to have consequences for other people who might not share the same interests, who might not have the same perception of what would be a good idea to do with this building. So I think it became very clear that this is a healthy discussion, because on one hand we see all these things kind of emerging and happening, but we also need to discuss how we're going to handle that. We heard Rachel before talk about new types of frameworks for decisions. So I think, unfortunately, the answer was not found in this discussion, but rather perhaps a very important question.
Can I just add one thing there? Because what we discussed in our group ties into that. We were talking about in our group that the internet really fosters us to think of art as a much more collective experience. And we're moving from the idea of the artist being another one of these strong individuals that's dying now, and art becoming much more of a communal social experience. We're talking about social arts. And if you think about that art in the future is going to be social, and art eventually is going to end up in a public place, then the idea of what a public square is has to change. It has to be a much more artistic place. But it can also, discussing what Rachel talked about earlier today, be a much more fluid place. Because we have building materials that are much more fluid, but we also have, huge computer screens and things like that are really affordable now that we can use. So that space can be much more fluid, it can change much more often, and it can be a space where people can affect what's happening there. And then again, that will build trust. Because if we actually do artistic things together, we're also becoming more trustworthy.
But it's also this question of our models of how do we make decisions. Is it okay to do this or not? And right now, we're not sure. I mean, things are happening. We can start all kinds of movements, but at the same time, in Sweden we have one culture, for instance. It's definitely, we don't have a squatting culture in claiming spaces. Other countries do, where it's less problematic, for instance. And this is where the discussion got kind of interesting. So it's difficult to know what is good for all of us. What are the principles here? And that we really need like agreements rather than just here's the law to agree on what seems like a healthy level of control in these issues. So that's actually where I would want to leave off and give the word back to you, Simon.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
So microphone, there we go. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to keep you on the stage for just 1 second. We, of course, have a very special guest with us here this afternoon, and I would like to invite her on the stage right now to perhaps comment on this panel discussion, and that's Hula Hamilton, Vice Mayor of the City of Stockholm. So if you could please join us, ma'am. And I would like to hear your comments, having sat and listened to this fantastic panel discussion. What are the thoughts that come to mind from your perspective?
Thank you for inviting me to this happening. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to be here during the day, but I certainly missed quite a lot of discussion, if I understand it correctly. But I think that it's really a challenge to be a politician in a city where there is so much engagement from a lot of citizens. And we like to plan, and perhaps we need to plan if we would like to have more infrastructure and so on. But we also have to see to that all these ideas have the possibilities to be realized. Actually, the 2 last days we spent discussing the budget for 2013. And one of the ideas in the budget that's been decided right now is that we would like to engage Stockholmers in having ideas on how to develop abandoned areas in the city. So this is something that we actually realized that there are a lot of the ideas out there in the city, and now is the time to collect them and tell the politicians in the city hall about what would you like to do with the abandoned areas in Stockholm. So we have actually money in the budget for doing some things about that, and that's only one small part of what you can do as a city, but we also have the Stockholm Open IT area that we actually opened up our digital information sources where you can actually use it for free to develop apps and web ideas and so on. So that's also one way of opening up for exchanging ideas and to develop the city together with all the citizens.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts. Before